The really high leverage area for us is what kind of tools do we need? How do we expose the internal APIs and manage the context so the agent can actually get stuff done?
That's Adam Ben-David. He leads AI at Hyperexponential, or HX, a platform that helps insurers price complex risk. Think rocket launches or cyber attacks, things too complicated for standard rating engines. Their system processes a project's archive of information and supports the underwriters and actuaries in pricing that complex policy. It's really interesting to see AI now being used commercially at scale in specific niches. What's interesting about Adam's approach is how he's not focused on the model anymore. They really are plateauing or converging. You can see this. The real question, context. What information does your agent actually need to get the job done? How do you gather and organize that information? How do you make it persistent? How do you deliver it without overwhelming a session? The shift from prompt engineering to model configuration to now context, building the information scaffolding that makes a model really useful and reliable.
The concept of agent was really becoming pretty clear, and definitely by the end of last year, I think there's a very set paradigm, which is just you have a language model, it can generate tool calls, and you can loop the response of those tool calls back to the agent, and then back to the LM, and then you have an agent. But we have kind of this pocket realm where we need our agents to have the general capabilities that coding agents need, but then hyper specialized support for this very specific domain and doing these very specific things. Sort of moving from really obsessing about which model is best and testing all the different versions of the model, kind of moving from prompt engineering to context engineering. So now the really interesting, I think from an engineering leadership perspective, you always try to focus on what is highest leverage. So we kind of take the same approach, which is the industry is moving at large on how agents should be. So what is the highest leverage thing that we should be doing versus pulling in from what the industry does? And it's kind of recently resolved, and things change so quickly. So we'll see, I don't know what the shelf life is for that, but really the tools that we give the agent and the context management of how to handle the context are the most highest leverage. And the core agent loop itself has become, I guess you could even say, kind of commodified. There's a number of open source frameworks. Everyone kind of has the same pattern. So the really high leverage area for us is what kind of tools do we need? How do we expose the internal APIs and manage the context so the agent can actually get stuff done? I think the specific parts for us is its ability to query the source code of this proprietary framework. Because as that framework evolves, it needs to be able to know how to implement things. So for example, the front ends of hyperexponential raters are React, but it's kind of a superset, customized flavor of React. So it needs to know which components do we have, what props do they accept, how can you set that up? So we have kind of custom compilers or linters, you can think about it that way, which we compile and lint the code as we need to run it, so we can provide that to the agent. So when it writes code, it can also compile it itself, check the compilation, and see that it works before it hands it back to the user. So it's a combination of really being able to access the source code of the framework and figure out how to write things, and then test and execute it within our environment.
One thing that differentiates an agent from a chatbot is tooling, the ability to read, write, and run. Companies like Hyperexponential are now taking bespoke tooling to specialist industries and seeing what AI with solid context and for purpose tooling can really do. HX's agents can query the framework documentation, compile the code, run it in a sandbox, check if it actually works, all bespoke to their end goal. Models are commoditized. There's little advantage in one over another. The real impact right now is coming from context and tooling. And HX shows how coupling really good domain knowledge with specific actions in a specialist environment can massively improve the usefulness of a model.
Well, to not get into fine tuning. And I think during the scaling days, everyone agreed, okay, there's no point in fine tuning because it's going to erase your gains tomorrow when a new version comes out. And actually, I think a lot of gains are coming also from the big research labs improving the tuning around the agent's ability to deal with tools and kind of manage context, but a lot of just the application structure around it, Anthropic releasing skills.md, which is really an application pattern on how to reveal tools to the agent, which is less about fine tuning, etc. I think there's a lot of really interesting improvements that are happening in the agent's performance just on application design, right? And how you write into the system. So I think most companies, you just want to have a gateway and be agnostic where you can basically kind of test everything and then optimize towards that. So for us, it's not currently about the language model itself. We'll just basically pull that in as compute. It's kind of the framework and the chassis and the harness that we build around it. I think when there were really stark differences between some of the models and when iterations completely change things, than it really was about which model over time. But they're getting so close in their performance in some areas that I think that's kind of like a less interesting, again, from like a leverage perspective, I think it's kind of less interesting over time. So I don't know how much customers in the future are going to care to select the model that they want. And you see Cursor, for example, already moving in that direction of just obfuscating that away. So the beginning was just pick your model, put in your key. And then they kind of slowly pulled that back. And then they released Composer 1, which is their model, right? So I think increasingly people are going to be less concerned about which specific model from which specific provider. It'll be more just kind of a compute style and more about the capabilities it has, the context, the tooling, and all the things that it can be armed with to do. I think that'll be more interesting for people. Myself and one of the other product leads here, also as an engineer by background, we had this idea, like, can we just turn the IDE into our operating system? Like, can we just only work from the IDE? So one cool thing, and a lot of other people have been talking about it, like how terminal interfaces are coming back. Like there's been so much investment into terminal interaction in the last, few year even than like the last 20. So it's really interesting to see that like weird thing come back. But you can kind of, with MCP, and you have a file system and you have a terminal and they all have a deep web search, you can pretty much do everything from your IDE. You like almost never need to leave. And you can kind of just drive your entire day from the terminal in your IDE, and it's amazing. So I think for developers, it's like a dream. You can just live completely in your IDE. You don't need anything else. Increasingly, people are going to be less concerned about which specific model from which specific provider. It'll be more just kind of a compute style and more about the capabilities it has, the context, the tooling, and all the things that it can be armed with to do. I think that'll be more interesting for people.